My understanding was that Valentina was going to be here too. So Valentina Montealegre, she's a business administrator from National University. She got a grant from OIE and Coimbra Group. She has a magister on geography from the Uberland University. She has a special course on power and
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your invitation, for being part of this event. The reflections that I bring today is part of my second chapter of my thesis, Between the Ways of Fact and Ways of Right. And basically, I'm going to start talking about the centralization, the non-resolved debt of the Aquarius Bank, that were the part that fit the conflict that was the principal base of the problem of the landing restitution. So for this, I'm going to move quickly through this because the professor Dario Fajardo explained a big part of this. I start talking about that the policies of agrarian reformations are being counter reforms, beginning from the first one in 1936 that difference the land owned versus the land not owned, the lay of 1944 that wants to contain the struggle given in the states, in the coffee states, that finally end up in the burst of Bogota, so April 9th, and then the consolidation of the Frente Nacional, something that I call a kind of dictatorship, a legal dictatorship that lasts 16 years from the beginning of the conservative and liberal parties, consolidating a political power that's still concentrated in the land. Law 135, the 61s, legalized the dispossession of the peasants' communities, migration and conflict, colonization, migration, conflict, settling that make after the violence a lot of peasants populate other territories without land titles, and the differential rent. As long as the agriculture burden is being broadened, other people were getting the lands without the rights. So they were starting and broadening that limit for the peasants.
so this development model, which is centralized, and that's something that is also a basis for what the panel members said before. So Alliance for Progress was one part of it. Then Lasso Plan, which was a repression form. They didn't want the agrarian community to own land. We had bombardments. We had Marquetalia. We also have some agrarian communities as El Pato and in Quindío. We also had some of them. These were the places where all the guerrilla groups came out of, and this was all based on problems with owning land. Basically, what we have is this enhancement of the agricultural borders, this fight for land commanded by these agrarian communities that were always looking for land ownership, and we're going to see later how these territorial rights fragmented even more the fight that was taking place between black communities, indigenous communities, agrarian communities, and these ended up in collective black land, indigenous reservations, but there was no political representation for the agrarian communities because these agrarian communities are not acknowledged as a political force. They are not acknowledged as an environmental force either. So that's one of the problems. And the Constitution from 1991, that's the consolidation of a new social pact. The decentralization started back in the 80s within a global context, taking into consideration structural policies which consolidated neoliberalism in these Latin American countries based on multilateral banking institution privatization and institutional liberalization related to agrarian reform. So what we did here basically was bureaucratize social movements by means of cutting in pieces community organizations, unions, and on the other hand, there was also a reivindication of movements from the left, movements such as UP, that's a political party that was killed off basically. Over 3,000 people were assassinated selectively, but these brought about a new political outlook to the country associated to land ownership. I would like you to take a look at this map. A map of confrontations related to development, the development plan in our country. We have in the periphery agrarian communities. Here in the middle, in these areas, we have all these parts where we had all these migrations coming from the coffee growing areas. That was the settling process, the original one, in the mountain ranges associated to coffee. Coffee was the means by which Colombia inserted itself in the international market. So we had people moving from the coffee growing area, these areas. By the end of the 90s, we have Morales, Cimitarra up north. We have black communities here in the Pacific, and we have these indigenous reservations located especially here and here. What don't we see here? We don't see any changes in the central area where the wealth is concentrated. We don't see any changes related to land ownership. And that takes us to the boundaries, to see how this development model has been given a space in the country. So this is not compatible to sustainable development, because the fight for the land is also a land for common goods, and this is part of a clash of classes, and the strongest is going to prevail in a capitalist world, as Jairo Estrada said it before, brought about an accumulation crisis. If we go a little bit farther back, one of the things that changed our productive model was narco trafficking as a means of accumulation. Where was this value being generated? In the periphery, but where was the value being generated? Actually, Bogota, Medellin, Cali, those were the main cities, and we had exit points from our ports in the Pacific and the Atlantic. The weakest link is still the agrarian communities. They are still marginalized. They don't have access to commercialization channels, the marketing channels, and they are far away from the central areas of the country. Between 1997 and 2002, we only have 7 agrarian reservation areas, very few hectares. During Álvaro Uribe presidential term, some of these areas were suppressed, where they disappeared. So we had a very big reduction of these areas in our country based on Law 160 from 1994. So this is telling us that there is a consolidation of the contradiction of a decentralized model. That was what they were aiming for, but in 1991 this is a very centralized model. In actuality, this is a graph from Dr. Darío Restrepo. This shows us where wealth is concentrated based on our GDP. 60% of the wealth is only in 5 departments of our 32 territories. So this is showing us the years from which decentralization in our country started to take place. So we can see that there is no difference, there is no decentralization. The wealth is still very much centralized. It moved very little. The mid-level belongs to 12 out of the 32 departments. This is about 27%. Then back in 2004, we had a very big change. This is very important. The low level of wealth accumulation, where we only have 8%, it moved from 8.29% to 9.32%. 15 out of 32 departments had this change. Cauca, Casanare, Quindío, Arauca, La Guajira, Sucre, Caquetá, Putumayo, Vaupés, Guainía, amongst others. They are here present. So this is showing us very clearly how this territorial model is still being consolidated, even though we have decentralized policies and policies that are supposed to bring about an agrarian reform. This productive model has as a main focus illegal mining too, and we can see here on this map how on the periphery of our country is where we have this illegal mining production model. This is associated to illegal activities, and they have not been is assessed properly. That hasn't been done either. So what do we have? We have an agrarian community that lives in the periphery that has never been considered as part of our development model as a nation. So here I want to talk about a different order for the agrarian community. First of all, the agrarian reform. Out of all the categories that comprise the national system for protected areas, only 3 allow the settlement for new groups of people. Only 3. These are an integrated management district and a reservation, a special forest reservation. Out of those 3, only 1 is private in nature, so it doesn't necessarily link the government through a state policy. So what I want to say here is that the agrarian communities, using the strategies that are available to them and using the law, sometimes using arbitrary or random actions, they try to use all the tools they have available to them to become part of our production model. So I want to talk about ADC, an Association for the Development of Agrarian Communities. This is located in Nariño, southern part of the country. It was born back in 1991, but this is part of a very nice process for the agrarian communities. These logos represent every single one of the associations which are part of this bigger association that have been put together to buy land close to the La Cocha Lake in order to put together agrarian community projects to involve the participation of the youth in order to get them to be part of the production model or plan in our country. They also have a very strong work being done in terms of environmental issues, and they replicate the lessons learned in many parts, and they have been generating many proposals. They are trying to get the agrarian communities to be seen as political actors in the country, and they're also trying to consolidate a dignified style or level of living for the agrarian community. Mingas, that's how they call them, the different groups that comprise these associations. the districts of integrated management. We have many examples here. These experiences based on the conjunction that we have between the environmental authorities and Corantioquia. What they have done is that in these territories where we have the ability to have human settlements and where we have through the use of management plans, we regulate the use of soil. So they have proposed agricultural activities as a model to develop. So we have agricultural conversion projects. We have a very small part of this, but anyway, they're trying to get this going. They're trying to generate the right spaces and venues for this thing to happen. This is being done in areas where it's possible to have new human settlements. At the end, I'm going to talk about this, but anyway, I want to mention some of the background related to this. So, what these things are doing is making visible all these migration processes that we're having within the country, where we had all these extraction activities. Then these areas turn into forest reservations based on law number 2 from 1959, where this law was used to generate new reservations. Over 6 million hectares were brought into this program of forest reserves. They were also treated as special development areas, and they also covered new agrarian communities that were working on some productive projects, but the difference here was that these reservations were trying to solve a problem related to these communities that were not being protected. That's the only case where we have had this happen. This is data from our National Statistics Department from 2003 up to 2 years ago. We can see how areas protected areas that allow for new human settlements, they have been regressing, while reservations for flora and wildlife and all the other categories that we had in the graph prior, they have all increased. This also has to do with green capitalism. These are things that they do in order to capitalize on natural resources. And not acknowledging the agrarian communities, and not acknowledging the work that they have had in order to protect all these areas. I would like to highlight here on this graph is another experience, the coffee growing landscape. These are proposals that come from the top down, meaning the Natural Resources Code from 1993, and also the coffee growing landscape initiative. They regulate space, and they make this subject to a class of classes. This is related to 3 different departments in Colombia, many municipalities and townships. What this is trying to do is protect the agrarian communities which make their living out of growing coffee. So we now know that coffee growing business has been going back as there is no technical assistance anymore. We are now importing all the inputs for coffee growing with a very high price. So there have been a lot of projects led by Paredes University, by civil society. We have had some initiatives with seeds, and there's been a big fight against this Barbas Bremen energy generation project, which aims to produce energy for export purposes There is a video where they express the problem itself. They talk in this video about how Colombia is self-sustainable from an energy standpoint, but if this project goes ahead, we are going to damage a very big area around Cauca, this river up north, where it comes to life, the way it will be affected by this project. What I want to highlight here is what the communities say, what universities and other institutions say. We have many institutions involved. This MILA is an Latin American institution that aims to use different territories for mining and energy purposes. This is something that I want you to take a look at, how the agrarian communities are environmental actors. We have different indigenous reservations, Córdoba and Sucre, Cañamomo, Mona Prieta. We have also reservations in Huila, El Maño, another one that we don't have here in Nariño, La Unión, southwest in this part, and that was declared back in 2012 after a very strong fight from our Seeds for Life program. The entire municipality was declared free of transgenic food. So we are using all the information related to weather and food generation, food production in this area to support this project. We have this project, we call it interethnic territories. We are working in the southwest of the country, Nariño. In this municipality, we have the presence of indigenous and black communities. They showed up in this municipality, and they have a plan that they have put together, Pladia 2035. You can look it up on the net, and this is a result of territorial processes which are related to social come-togethers and also manifestations that have taken place. We have the participation of the youth from southern Cauca and Nariño. So what they say in this territorial ordering plan, they say, even though they do not acknowledge it, we have been here taking care of this territory, organizing it, and even though you do not acknowledge it, we're going to move forward with our ordering plans, territorial organization plans. So I would like to now tell you about this testimony. It says, when we went back after 10 years of forced displacement, we didn't know what to do. The crystal water rivers were not there, the birds were not there, butterflies were not there. Everything around us was green, the green of the military forces and the palm trees. There was no corn, there was no huts. Everything was a palm tree, damn palm tree. This is a testimony from a black community member. This comes from April 18, 2006. This is used to talk about the impact of the armed forces present in the area in Chocó. They also have a proposal called biodiversity area, and what they are trying to do here is preserve all the customary actions that they do related to soil management, territory management. We have another community, Paz Apartado, that's a proposal related to the armed conflict and how we can live in peace and how can we be a productive part of society. We have also projects from southern Cauca. This is related to ethnic groups which are about to be acknowledged. So this agrarian meetup is related to all these groups of people that were very much affected by paramilitary forces at the beginning of the 2000s. So in this testimony, what we can see is that before these problems, we had the biodiversity, we had corn, we have many things that after the paramilitary forces came about and they started to plant the oil palm. That's when they start to have this single plantation model that has nothing to do with the environmental models that have been used to administer that territory historically. Proposals which are very much different to this. So agrarian food production territories. This is a project that started back in 2014, and what they're looking for is the acknowledgement of territory rights by agrarian communities. Here we have a very clear bordering effort from the mobilization areas of the CNA. So what are we trying to do here? Get a clear view on the problems. Coca leaves, coca plantations, that's where we have it. The agrarian community, they know where these plantations are. They are very much affected by all these bad profiling that they have been subjected to. So the production of marijuana and coca, this is what they try to do. Something that they say is that we are not narco traffickers, we are coca growers, we are an agrarian community, and these are our proposal. What they want to do is change the outlook. They want to change the soil use model, which has subjected all these areas which are very much productive into the hands of the narco trafficking community. And here we have a regional separation for the agrarian communities. Here we don't only have the 7 ones that we mentioned before around the periphery of Colombia. We also have the de facto ones and the ones that have been requested a permit to have. So we have an area, we have a map of agrarian communities that has been submitted to the government. They are getting permission for the areas that have not been approved. So the agrarian communities have said, because we are not political actors, we are not environmental actors, we are going to go into these communities, we're going to acknowledge ourselves, acknowledge our communities, and we are going to act as an agrarian community. So this is the third chapter, where I try to show how the territorial rights for the agrarian communities is evidenced in spaces such as Macarena, Sada, Guayavero. These areas are not acknowledged by the government, but it's been there from the 60s, and from then it has been going through a very strong process of territorial right demands, requests. These are the only areas that can solve the problem that they have been handling or been in charge of, and that's basically what they try to do. We have a district in the western part of Antioquia as a proposal that's trying to stop the urban expansion that has been eating up all the rural areas around Bogota. And in 2014, they had a very big achievement because they went to the entire department. They have a proposal related to agrarian production. They also have a brand that they used to sell their products. And I want to finish with this. I want to point out that territorial rights for agrarian communities has been part of our agenda, historically speaking, from 1920 in the northern coast. mm, Going through all these agrarian communities, Suma Pass community in Barranca, and all these other experiences, it show us that we have been producing a proposal to the country related to agrarian changes from ever since. So this is the very first point of the Havana negotiations. Agrarian communities and territorial ordering or organization. Here we have consensus that we have between the national parks and the agrarian communities, and then Decree 440 from 2016, which tries to avoid land restitution to operate